Tandika.
In a small village in the eastern part of Uganda, there lived a beautiful woman called Jane. She lived a perfect life because her parents cared for and raised her well. Unfortunately, her mother passed away, and her father remarried a woman with 2 stepsisters, Mary and Juliet. In the village, they always had beauty contests, and Jane decided to compete because she had all the qualities to qualify. This not only caused envy among other competitors, but also among her stepsisters, who plotted against her with the help of their evil mother. They trapped Jane's soul and offered her as a wife to the spirits of the gods. Jane started having dreams about intimacy with a spiritual man, which impregnated her through the intimacy with her soul. She began showing physical signs of pregnancy and could not participate in the beauty contest anymore. This led to her being disowned by her parents, who accused her of being careless and lacking morals and self-respect. Jane tried to explain her side of the story, insisting she didn't know how she got pregnant and that she was a virgin who had never been with any man. Jane cried as she packed her bags and left her parents' house in the middle of the night because they refused to believe her and felt disgraced by her. As Jane walked out of the village, she met a handsome man on the way. The man asked her where she was going at that late hour with tears in her eyes. Jane informed him that her parents had kicked her out because she was pregnant, and she did not know what to do. The man felt sorry for her and offered to take her to his home. He introduced himself as Peter. Jane was beautiful, with dark brown skin, long black hair, a pretty smile, and a graceful walk. Peter had fully fallen in love with her, but they were both from 2 different worlds. Peter was a very handsome man with strong features and short curly hair. His eyes were blue at night and normal during the day. He had a well-defined body and smooth black skin. Jane thought he looked like a painting of the gods. Peter treated Jane like a princess with so much love, care, and respect. Jane's heart softened towards Peter, and she fell in love with him dearly and madly. When her due date arrived, she delivered safely with Peter's help. Jane gave birth to twins. The children had blue eyes similar to Peter's. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, but later she noticed her twins had a similar birthmark to the one Peter had on his hand. Peter convinced Jane that these were just coincidences. They decided to live together as a couple with their twins, as husband and wife. Jane felt a bit weird, but still accepted the situation since her parents had abandoned her. However, she was troubled by Peter's movements every night. He always left her alone at 3 a.m., and she would wake up in the middle of the night alone, searching for him around the house, but finding no sign of him. Every morning, she would find him lying next to her. Whenever Jane brought up the question of his whereabouts, Peter would tell her that he was sleeping next to her the whole night. This troubled Jane. Determined to find out where her husband went every night, Jane prepared food, did all the work, took care of her twins, and decided to take a nap so she could stay awake the whole night. That evening, Peter came back home to a good meal and a happy wife. He didn't suspect anything. It was a normal routine. He put both sons to sleep, joined his wife in bed, and they went to sleep. Jane pretended to be asleep and kept an eye on her husband the whole night. She waited patiently until it was 3 a.m. She watched her husband stand and disappear from their bedroom and couldn't believe what she had just seen. She sat in deep thought, trying to figure out what had happened. She laughed to herself, thinking she was losing her mind as she waited for him to return, but she suddenly fell asleep. In the morning, she found herself in his arms as if nothing had happened. She wondered if it was just a dream and continued with her normal life as a wife, but every day she clearly remembered watching her husband disappear in front of her eyes. She realized she knew nothing about her husband, his background, parents, or siblings. She remembered that when she asked about his family, he would not give her a clear response. Jane started to think deeply. She started walking in the forest, but she was only walking in circles, always coming back to her house. Jane knew she was in a loop, but she remembered stories her grandmother told her about moving in the forest in circles. It meant the area was locked out of the normal world, and she was probably in a different realm. She rushed to the house to see her sons and found them playing with each other. She touched them to see if they felt normal, and they were perfectly okay. But she sat and thought. She slapped the oldest, and he didn't blink or cry, then did the same to the second one, and it was the same. Jane sat down in tears, realizing her children did not feel any emotions. They looked at her and continued playing. She recalled their moment of birth. They were perfect kids who never cried for anything, not even for breastfeeding. This is when she knew something was definitely wrong. Jane went to her husband's secret room and checked through everything. There was nothing wrong. Everything about him was perfect. Her heart was not settled, so the next day, she followed her husband into the woods and saw him enter a portal through a tree. Jane tried to follow him, but could not enter the portal. She rushed home, picked her older twin son, and brought him to the portal, and they managed to enter. This is when she knew her sons had special powers. Jane entered the new realm, which was dark and had an evil aura. She saw the sacrifices that had been captured, with her husband leading the ritual of blood sacrifice and drinking from the animals. Terrified, she concealed her physical presence with her son's aura, so no one could see her true form. Jane returned home and pretended she hadn't left. When her husband returned, he sensed strange powers and immediately asked his sons if they had left home. But they both denied it. Jane pretended everything was okay, but inside, she was scared. She calmed herself down and continued to deliberate about her situation. She concluded that despite her husband being a spirit, she was totally in love with him, but she wanted to know how she ended up with him and why he chose to help her when she had nowhere to go. Jane still had no idea how she had become pregnant, but she loved her children and was happy with her family. At one point, she regretted trying to know too much about her husband because she was happy in love and peace before all this. Jane decided to open up to her husband and reveal all that she had found out about him. She calmed herself down and continued to deliberate about her situation. One day, she prepared her twins and put them to sleep early, then waited for her husband. Peter came back home to a wonderful aroma and excitedly went into the kitchen to his wife. Jane welcomed her husband home warmly with a hug and served him dinner. She sat down with him and requested to talk to him about something. Peter didn't mind. Jane got straight to the point and said, "You're a spirit, and this is all a lie. Why?" Peter choked on her words, looked into her eyes, and saw her pain. He felt the same pain. He had fallen in love with Jane because of her beauty and purity. He never thought the day would come when Jane would find out about his real identity. Before Peter could speak, Jane asked another question. "Why me? Why did you choose me? Give me an explanation," she demanded. Peter asked her if she really wanted to know the truth. Jane replied yes. Peter informed her that a high witch from her village had offered her as a wife to the gods, so that she would fail the beauty contest by getting pregnant. Jane was in shock. She broke down in tears and cried so hard on the floor. "So, you are responsible for all of this?" Jane asked her husband once again. In shame, Peter replied yes, trying to lift her from the ground. "So you are the actual father of my twins?" Jane cried. Peter couldn't bear to see Jane in so much pain, so he promised he would give her freedom once again. Jane spent the next day feeling betrayed. She couldn't believe the lie she was living. First, her husband was a spirit, and second, he was the one responsible for the pregnancy that led to her being kicked out of her parents' house. Jane was hurting, but she was more confused because she loved Peter with all her heart. Peter treated her well with love and respect. Jane wanted to know if Peter had any real feelings, but he continued to apologize to her. He admitted that he had completely fallen in love with her, even though it was unacceptable. He promised to take Jane back to Earth, which she spent the next few days feeling betrayed about. However, as they had this conversation, David, a member of the cult, overheard them. He took the news back to the leaders of their cult. The leader was very angry with Peter. It was forbidden to bring humans to the underworld, and it was also forbidden to have children with women from Earth. Children born between spirits and humans were meant to be sacrificed at birth. Peter had committed many crimes. The cult called for him and his family. Peter was asked to choose to sacrifice one of the two, either the twins or his wife. Peter requested to take on the punishment, but the cult leader reminded him about his immortality and how he couldn't be punished physically. Jane looked at her children and, in pain, she accepted to sacrifice herself. Peter said no, he couldn't do that because he loved her more than the twins. Jane told him that the children were all she had, and she wouldn't keep living in any world without them. Peter broke down in tears, begging the cult leader to change the punishment. But the cult leader only made matters worse. He instructed Peter to carry out the sacrifice himself. However, Peter held Mary in his arms and cried. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Jane noticed that Peter was too weak to kill her, and for the sake of her twins, she grabbed the knife and killed herself. Peter wept loudly. He couldn't believe his beautiful wife was no more. He gathered himself and buried her, while the twins watched with no emotion, for they were young spirits and did not know the meaning of emotions. The moral of the story is that life can get worse at any moment and it's not fair. Good people often get hurt in the very end.